Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Meltdown. Today we will be reviewing every single studio album from legendary American death doom and death metal pioneers, Autopsy. Not gonna lie, I had originally planned to do this video closer to the end of the month, closer to the release date of Ashes, Organs, Blood, and Crypts, which will be the band's 9th full-length studio album, but you know what? I'm kind of bored, I'm kind of just sitting here doing nothing, and you know what? You clearly have nothing better to do, because if you did, you would probably be doing that instead of, sitting here with me right now. So screw it, let's just do reviewing every Autopsy album now. Why not? Screw it, whatever, who cares? As per the norm with these reviewing every album type videos, I am not interested in EPs, demos, live albums, or compilations, or anything released by any kind of solo or side project. I am looking exclusively at Autopsy's studio album output, and I will be talking about each album in order of release and assigning each a score out of 5. I should note, with this in mind, we will not be talking about so-called mini-albums like Skull Grinder and Puncturing the Grotesque, because the way I see it, a mini-album is just an EP with a different name. With this in mind, let's kick things off with Severed Survival, released in April 1989 via Peaceville Records, the band's official debut full-length studio album, a pioneering record for death metal. It does so much to further establish and cement the lyrical and the musical trajectory of death metal and its multiple, soon-to-emerge subgenres. Which isn't to discredit anything that Death or Morbid Angel would have done up to this point, because they've already been kicking around for a couple of years at this point and have already put out some pretty influential, groundbreaking records themselves. But whereas a lot of stuff they were writing was more progressive and complex and had some more thought-provoking lyrics and some more archaic concepts, with Autopsy, they're just like, no, we like gore and we like violence, and that's what we're all about, and that's what we're gonna fucking do on this album. And this kind of hyperfixation on really violent, gory lyrics and this really raw, organic production, and like just the overall way that Autopsy was writing songs so manic, so energetic, almost with a bit of a thrash metal edge to it with all these pyrotechnics and dynamics, that proved to be very influential to a lot of bands that were coming up at that time, like Exhumed and Cannibal Corpse. Couple that with some of the slower grooves and some of the more agonizing moments on this record, and, suddenly you have the birth of a new subgenre, death doom. For all these reasons alone, I feel like a record like Severed Survival is already kind of an essential listen for like death metal and extreme metal fans and connoisseurs. The fact that it also still holds up all these years later is just a bonus. Like, nearly 34, 35 years later, it remains potent, it remains sharp, it remains vicious and bloodthirsty and uncompromising. Songs like Charred Remains, Stillborn, the title track Severed Survival still pack so much legitimate punch. The slower, slimier, doomier grooves of tracks like Service for a Vacant Coffin, Disembowel, Ridden with Disease, are legitimately pretty ominous and legitimately pretty menacing as well, still to this day. Nice to see a baby Steve DiGiorgio on bass, too, like doing his best to make sure that bass is as much in the forefront of the sound as possible. And that's great, too, because that adds so much depth and weight and body to this. It's not even that you can just hear the bass, you can really feel it as it churns and rumbles your insides. I'm feeling a solid 4 to 5. Just a great record from start to finish. No duds, no fat, no filler, no time wasted. It's an important album, it's a legendary album, and it remarkably holds up years later without much or any issue to speak of. Pretty damn impressive. Next up, we have Mental Funeral, released in April 1991 via Peaceville Records once again. Often cited as the band's best record, their most important record, their most influential record, and it's very easy to see why. Essentially, the band have taken everything that made Severed Survival so good, and they've made it more nuanced, they've made it more expressive, they've made it more brutal. There are some more technical and progressive arrangements that exist without compromising the more violent and extreme moments on the record. The mixing and mastering here, the overall sound and vibe is very raw, very murky, but everything is still just visible enough. And though it does more, it's actually a much tighter record with a much faster flow, and it even wraps up in a slightly shorter amount of time. You have Hole in the Head, which has these great guitar-driven and bass-driven dynamics and harmonies and acrobatics. A lot of cool rhythmic changes and switches. I like what it kind of pulls from epic doom metal, and then how it kind of then transitions into like blistering pedal to the metal death metal. Then there's In the Grip of Winter, which, true to its name, has some cold and ominous grooves. It's quite slimy and malevolent. When it does eventually speed up a little bit, it ends up kind of feeling like just being repeatedly punched at a medium pace in the gut. Love the wailing guitars and screeches as well. This whole song just kind of sounds like somebody like very slowly dying to death in the midst of a blizzard and screaming out in pain. Love Twisted Massive Burnt Decay too. It opens this record on an awesome note with some very weird, disorienting like guitar textures and patterns amongst some very brutal like old school death metal. Bonesaw is great too. Like, this is like full on like death grind and grindcore. It's so intense, it's so fast, it's so in your face. Yeah, this is a 4.5 out of 5 for me. This is incredible. This is still to this day Autopsy's best fucking record. I love it. I can't get enough of it. I need this on vinyl. I need it. I need it so badly. If I could get just this on vinyl and Jane Doe from Converge, like these two albums together, that would be it. I can finally rest and watch the sun rise on a grateful universe. I mean, I'd still buy records because I'm a fucking idiot, but in theory, if I could just have those two, I could call it quits. Next up, we have Acts of the Unspeakable, released in October 1992 via Peaceville Records, and this is where things start to get kind of weird, and not necessarily in a super cool, fun way. From what I understand, Chris and the rest of the Autopsy gang were paying a lot of attention to other stuff that was happening within the extreme music and metal realms at that time. Specifically, they were paying a lot of attention to grindcore, and as such, the songs are a lot shorter in length and have a much more rabid, punchy, abrasive kind of feel and vibe, akin to that of like underground grindcore of the time. At the same time, though, they're still trying to bring in like those death metal and doom metal elements of Mental Funeral, and they're also going for a more muddy, murky, cavernous kind of production. And the result is something that feels kind of confused and messy, and it just sounds really soupy and uncomfortable. Like everything kind of bleeds and blurs together, and it can feel kind of random at times. It's not very cohesive. It doesn't really have any great flow to it whatsoever. I should note there are still some really interesting sections and parts here and there. Like, I do like some of the more twisted and technical riffery of Battery Acid Enema, for instance. The title track and Act of the Unspeakable does a decent job itself of, like, actually combining grind and death and doom into something that is listenable. Not great, necessarily. Like, it's still kind of awkward, but it is listenable. Like, it does have some really cool riffage in the very beginning. It does have a lot of energy and momentum. And when we get into some of the doomier aspects of the song, you know, you do have some great anguished vocal performances and some howling guitars. But man, there's a lot of stuff on here that just falls flat on its face, like Meat, Necrocannibalistic Vomitorum. I feel like as the album goes on, it gets lazier too. Like by the time we get to the last couple of tracks, especially Voices, it just kind of feels like Autopsy are on autopilot. Yeah, this is a very confusing, messy album. It's very poorly organized, very poorly produced, massive step down in quality of production and songwriting from the previous album. For me, this is like a 2 out of 5. This is mediocre. This is not good. I don't hate it. I do think it has some interesting ideas and elements, but just bad execution from start to finish, you know? Next up, we have Shit Fun, released in September 1995, once again via Peaceville Records. Many people consider this to be Autopsy's worst album. And I think I'm inclined to agree. I think so. I will argue that this is better than Acts of the Unspeakable in a few important areas. For one, it is not as clumsy, it is not as confused, it is not as incohesive. It has a more crisp and clear sound and feel and direction. It is sticking close to what Autopsy knows best, but it is still bringing in some new flavors from like hardcore punk of the time. Though not remarkable, I think that songs like Fuck Dog, Humiliate Your Corpse, Death Mask, like they're aggressive, they get the job done, they don't waste too much time. I kind of like Formaldehyde and its drugged out psychedelic death metal wailings. I kind of like Bowel Ripper as well, and its like very claustrophobic, noisy vibe. Other stuff like Blood Orgy, Slaughter Day, you know, it's got some of those classic Autopsy goods as well. And in general, I don't even really mind the edgy, dark, like hardcore punk sense of humor here with cuts like the aforementioned Formaldehyde, as well as I Shit on Your Grave. I think the issue is that everything kind of in between just isn't as satisfying, and these tracks, even at their best, never reach the highs of something like Severed Survival or Mental Funeral. This thing is also way too long. Previous Autopsy projects have been like 35 to 40 minutes long. This is 55 minutes long, and it does not fucking need to be. I'm feeling a 2.5 out of 5. It's okay. I don't know. I was able to get a lot more out of this than I did out of Acts of the Unspeakable, but I will concede it's still, like, not a great record. This just ultimately isn't it, and clearly they agree on some level, because Autopsy disbanded after this, and Chris would spend a majority of his time playing, like, hardcore-influenced death metal, with Abscess basically until 2010. At which point, Autopsy returns with Macabre Eternal, released in May 2011 via Peaceville Records. No more experimenting with hardcore and grindcore and all these different song lengths and all these different textures and production styles and methods and such. Autopsy is just doing what is expected of Autopsy and what people want from Autopsy. They're just making gory, stupid, fucking pedal to the metal death doom, and they're doing so with energy, enthusiasm, and probably some of the best songwriting we've heard since Mental Funeral. There are still some issues, mainly that this thing is 65 minutes long, but all things considered, big improvement. Tons of great cuts on here like Hands of Darkness, Dirty Gore Whore, Seeds of the Doom, Bludgeoned and Brained, Spill My Blood, all focusing on like the classic sounds of like classic Autopsy, but with crisp, modern, well-done production. It has a little bit of a crusty crunch, but for the most part, it's actually a very clean mix, which I think works well for Autopsy in this day and age, especially with Chris's vocals and like all of the wailing and all of the screaming and screeching. You can actually kind of hear more of that, and it feels more authentic, and it isn't kind of lost in the madness of everything else. The 11-minute long Sadistic Gratification is really interesting as well, probably one of the most progressive and complex tracks we've seen from Autopsy, even still to this day. Again, the downside for me is this thing is 65 minutes long. This thing is essentially like playing two Autopsy albums back to back, but a lot of y'all, if you love Autopsy, probably already do that to begin with, so maybe with that in mind, this is just saving y'all some time. And again, considering that massive gap in time between this and like something good from Autopsy, I really don't think people were complaining back in the day. So I'm going to chalk this up to me just being a nitpicky asshole, and we're going to go with a solid 4 to 5 on this bad boy. Autopsy is back, baby, and guess what? They don't go nowhere. Autopsy from here on is consistently great. Case in point, the Headless Ritual, released in June 2013, once again via Peaceville Records. Holy shit, what a brutal fucking slab of full-on American death doom. What an absolute fucking banger from start to goddamn finish. It's bigger, it's meaner, it's grosser, it's louder, it's more violent, it's more disgusting. Some of the band's best riffs, some of their best beats, some of their best progressions. Fantastic fucking songs all around with lots of twists and turns, lots of great grooves. It's sick, it's satisfying. Mangled Far Below, She Is a Funeral, Slaughter at Beast House, Art Cadaver, Running from the Goat Head. Even the interlude cut, Thorns and Ashes, I thought was pretty cool with like some soaring twin guitar leads and some really venomous vocal work. Hands down the best production I've heard on an Autopsy record. I mean, it's just so fucking crisp and punchy and dynamic, but it still, like, feels really fucking gross and vile. I'm feeling a 4.5 out of 5 on this one, honestly. I think this is a fucking incredible record. Of Autopsy's modern output, I'm tempted to say that this is the best of the best. I'm very tempted. It's all great. But, like, this is the Olympic gold medal in fucking modern Autopsy greatness. Like, it's just so fucking good. Next up, we have Tourniquets, Hacksaws, and Graves, released in April 2014, literally less than a year later, once again via Peaceville Records. And honestly, you can copy and paste a lot of what I literally just said about the Headless Ritual. I mean, it's so fucking gnarly, so fucking killer. It doesn't waste time, it doesn't fuck around, it only finds out, and it does so at your fucking expense. I will say this does lean more so into like full-on death metal, but I'm fine with that. I mean, there's some really savage stuff here, like the aptly titled Savagery, which opens this album on an incredible note. King of Flesh Ripped, After the Cutting, the title track, Tourniquet, Hacksaws, and Graves. The self-titled cut, Autopsy, is great true. Love those bending guitar notes and how ominous and aggravating it is. You know what? Fuck it. I'm feeling a 4.5 out of 5 on this one, too. Like, it's just so fucking goddamn brutal. I personally, like, gun to my head, would pick Headless Ritual over this. But I mean, goddamn, I'd maybe sit there and think about it for at least a couple of seconds. An excellent fucking record. Like, holy shit. Modern Autopsy just doesn't fucking miss. Now, in between this and Morbidity Triumphant, which was released last year in October, we had a couple EPs and mini-albums and demos and compilations, namely Skullgrinder and Punching the Grotesque, both of which are referred to as mini-albums. There's kind of some debate as to whether that means it's a full-blown album or an EP. In my book, they're EPs, but I'm going to give them a shout-out here regardless because they're both awesome and you should definitely check them out. Puncturing the Grotesque in particular has some more like really old-school kind of underground metal vibes that I'm really digging. With that now out of the way, let's move on to the final album in today's video, Morbidity Triumphant, released in September last year, 2022, once again via Peaceville Records. Holy shit, they've been with Peaceville this whole time. Fucking good for them. A lot of the things that I've loved about the last three albums, Macabre Eternal, Headless Ritual, Tourniquets, like that all still, like, you can, again, literally copy and paste. Fucking literally. I think it's worth noting, though, that after the more death metal-centric Tourniquets, this one does balance more so of those doom metal influences, specifically some of those old-school doom metal influences. I would say this feels most in line with what we heard from Mental Funeral back in the day, so much so that this could have been its direct follow-up. Production-wise, too, I feel like we're bringing in some more old-school, like, or late 80s, early 90s death metal flavors into the mix as well, while still keeping it, like, pretty modern and pretty fresh. That I really love. And, of course, you know, the songs, fucking awesome. Stab the Brain, The Voracious Ones, Maggots in the Mirror, Skin by Skin, the list goes on and on, man. No fat, no filler, only bangers, only the most brutal of bangers, too, might I add. I remember giving this a 4.5 out of 5 when I reviewed it. I think now I would lean closer towards a 4 out of 5, but that 4 out of 5 is an insanely enthusiastic one, which is also, like, on the edge of being a 4.5 out of 5, if that makes sense. Like, I'd say of this modern stuff, like, Headless Ritual and Tourniquets is up here, and then Morbidity Triumphant, and then Macabre Eternal. Like, it's all great. It's not even really a discussion as to whether or not it's great. It's more so like, alright, but which one is your favorite? I'm not going to go into too much more detail. There just really isn't much more to say. It's Autopsy doing what they do best, without compromise, without any fucking bullshit. It fucking rocks. It's brutal. It's gross. Crazy pumped for the new album. Fuck yes. And voila, reviewing every Autopsy album. Now it's your turn to tell me, what's your most favorite Autopsy album? What's your least favorite Autopsy album? Did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? How would you rank all of their albums? Please, let me know. I'm genuinely really curious and would like to hear from you. Press this button to subscribe right here. Look, even more videos. Check us out on the social medias, at The Metal Meltdown. Check us out on the Redbubble and put me on your body. Buy a chompy sticker and slap it on your ass. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.